Alrighty, good morning. It's good to see you all this morning. Let's go ahead and get started on relationship workshop number 5, talking about parents and kids. And then we'll finish up with just talking about kids. So let me go ahead and pray and we'll get started. God, thank you for another day. Thank you for another opportunity, God. We ask that you open our eyes to whatever it is you want us to see as it pertains to parents and kids, what our responsibilities are as it relates to them. Help me to speak slowly and clearly. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Alrighty, so with school starting back and with the current climate of the world in general, I think it's probably a good time to talk about the parent-to-child relationship. I think that's necessary to talk about that. It's cool that, you know, we're coming off of the heels of learning about our roles and responsibilities within the family in our discipleship class. But there were some situations and some scenarios that we didn't address. And so I want to hit on those this morning. And then we'll actually spend a little bit of time talking about our kids at the end. So first of all, let's talk about the principles and practices of blended families. The principles and practices of blended families. Blended families are becoming more and more prevalent, and here's what we know. This is what we know for a fact. Blended families rarely, if ever, fully blend. They rarely, if ever, fully blend. And so the reality of a man not being the blood father to a woman's child and a woman not being the blood mother of a man's child may rear its ugly head at some point in the relationship. And so your first blank is that every family relationship is a system. Every family relationship is a system. There are some clipboards in the back, Sister Tia. Every family relationship is a system. And so when one relational component changes, there's a domino effect. There's a domino effect that changes the whole system. And so maybe something is said or maybe something is done that can change the whole dynamic of a blended family, for good or for bad. And so your next blank is blended families are not impossible, but they definitely will not be easy. They're not impossible, but they definitely will not be easy, because the thing that is needed most in a relationship, which is honesty, has to be dealt with in the right way. Sometimes you can't say what needs to be said because at the end of the day, you're not their parent. You're not their parent. And so your next blank is success in blended families requires extreme effort, time, intentionality, and love. That's what it takes. So if blended family, there's hope. There's definitely hope for you. But if you're not in one, maybe you're considering being in one, count the costs. Count the cost and count the cost thoroughly, because it's nothing to take lightly. It's almost like taking on twice the responsibility from the jump, and I'm in no way discouraging against it. If that's something you decide to do, cool. You just need to know what you're getting yourself into. And so it seems like one of the most neglected things in the world today is premarital counseling. Premarital counseling. And in the rare case that people actually do it, they don't take it seriously. And then 5 years later, they have no idea who they married because nothing was discovered or brought out in the counseling. Everything was roses and everything was sunshine during the dating stage. And people talking about, I just want to wake up next to her beautiful face every morning. Trash. That's trash. Premarital counseling is a wise choice because you all can honestly walk through expectations together. So in counseling, the biblical expectations of a husband should be clearly laid out, and the biblical expectations of a wife should be clearly laid out, so there are no surprises. What happens is that people disregard premarital counseling, and then they get married, and then they end up needing real marital counseling before the relationship is going to fall apart. But half of those issues could have been avoided. So premarital counseling is a time for people to work through specific finances. There should be no secrets when it comes to the finances with your spouse. Some people go into a marriage with a secret bank account. For what? For what? You see, the love of money is the root of all evil, and that evil can show itself even in marriages. And so next, you all need to walk and talk. Here's your next blank. Walk and talk through what the impact of blending the families together would be on each child. What would the impact be? There needs to be some agreement on parenting goals and discipline with all the kids, whether they are yours or not. A lot of times arguments form based on how discipline is shown to the children, so that needs to be worked out, that needs to be agreed upon beforehand. Which leads to another thing that is very much misunderstood in your next blank. Within a blended family, you need to make your spouse your new unequivocal number one relationship ahead of the children. Ahead of the children. If you choose to marry this man or this woman, just like in an unblended family, your spouse is to come first, not the kids. If your relationship with your spouse isn't right, the relationship with the kids isn't going to be right. And that's not going to be fun for anybody. So we need to develop a rhythm for family times that are together and family times that are apart. Don't force it. Don't expect too much too soon. And if conflict arises, which it more than likely will, develop a communication method to wrestle them down in a non-threatening and safe environment. But most importantly, in your next blank, make the spiritual development of your marriage and family the utmost priority. Make the spiritual development of your marriage and family the utmost priority. You see, only God and supernatural love can make a blended family work. And you don't have that ability apart from a real relationship with Christ. It's impossible to do this in your flesh. So making a blended family work is going to take time, and it's going to be harder than you thought. But at the same time, just like unblended families are supposed to be a picture and representation of the family of God, blended families, your next blank, blended families can be a glorious testimony of God's restoration and redemption. It can be a glorious testimony of God's restoration and redemption. So if you're in a blended family right now, don't quit. Don't withdraw from it. Don't bail out on your family. Just know that perseverance and patience will bring you positive results. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, he says, "My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse or different temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." Hebrews 10:36, "For ye have need of patience." We need to exude and to show patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. Okay, now let's say someone in here may be a single parent. They're not in a blended family. What are your responsibilities? What are you supposed to do? Good question. And the answer is in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. It says, "Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant my husband is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord." So her husband is dead. This is leaving her to be a single mother. "And the creditors come to take unto him my two sons to be bondmen, about to make my sons slaves. And Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in thy house, and in the house? And she said, Thine handmaid hath not anything in the house, save a pot of oil, except a pot of oil. Then he said, Go, borrow thee vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and shalt pour out into all those vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So she went from him, and shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, Bring me yet a vessel. And he said unto her, There is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. And then she came and told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil and pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. And so in 7 scriptures, we can almost see the totality of circumstances in the life of a single parent. The first thing we have to understand is that none of us are exempt. None of us are protected from the pains and sufferings of life. Life is going to happen. Jesus says in this world we will have tribulation. So therefore, we should always operate out of humility and be very, very careful when we're tempted to sit in judgment of somebody else in their situation. Got to be careful. It's easy for us to come down on a single parent. It's easy for us to criticize everything they're doing as if we have everything right. And we don't. We need to be careful trying to take the place of judge, jury, and executioner of other people's lives. As always, in this relationship workshop, the truth is going to be told, but it's not intended to bash single parents. But what I want to do, I want to look at 7 resolutions for single parents. I want to look at 7 things that may be helpful for any single parents. And these are just, there are plenty more that you can find in the Bible, but these are just 7 that I thought could be offered as helpful tips or determinations that single parents can make in their life. And the first one is point number 1, make the most out of everything that you have. Make the most out of everything that you have. Your situation is what it is, right? It is what it is. There's nothing you can do to go back and change it, so stop trying to. Trying to go back and change the past only breeds frustration. Philippians chapter 3, verse 13, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth into those things which are before. So what you have is what you have, so make the most out of it, and that starts with a change of mind and a change of attitude. Our situation may not ever change, but the way we look at our situations can. So your next blank is sometimes you can't control what happens to you, but you can control what happens in you because of what Jesus did for you. Sometimes you can't control what happens to you, but you can control what happens in you because of what Jesus did for you. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Change your thinking about your current situation. Make the most out of everything that you have and don't allow yourself to live in misery. Point number 2. Be the best parent you can possibly be. Be the best parent you can possibly be. The reality is a single parent cannot provide the same quality of care and quantity of time as a 2-parent home. Single moms, there are going to be some things that you just can't do. There are going to be some life lessons and skills that are typically taught by a man that you won't be able to teach. And the same thing goes for single dads. There are some awkward conversations that you need to have and will probably get wrong simply because you're a man. But in either case, it shouldn't stop you from trying. It should not stop you from trying. Just because the opposite sex isn't present, that should not stop you from doing your best to be the best mother or father that you can be. What you have to remember, your next blank, is that God is able to fill the empty spaces in the heart of the child. God is able to fill the empty spaces in the heart of that child. Luke chapter 1, verse 37, for with God nothing shall be impossible. Nothing shall be impossible with him. So don't feel bad if there are things that you don't know or things that you can't communicate with your child simply because you don't understand. Do the best you can. Do the best you can. Don't allow guilt to drain your energy and to cause you to focus on things you can't control in the first place. Control what you can control and trust God to fill in the gaps. This leads to the next resolution. Point number 3, develop a network of reliable resources. Develop a network of reliable resources. You're going to need some help. You're going to need some help. You might as well place your pride to the side and admit the fact that you will need some help. But if you don't surround yourself with people that you can rely on, it's going to make your journey that much more difficult because you're going to get burned out. And so your next blank is a lot of the times people don't receive the help they need because they are struggling in silence. You're struggling in silence. I'm not saying everyone needs to know your business, but you need to be vulnerable with someone to be able to express the fact that you need help. You need help. You, as the parent, need community as much as your child needs it. And this is when our physical families step up, but it's also when our spiritual family needs to step up. But again, if we never see you, or if we don't know you're struggling, how can we help? How can we help? So develop some relationships with a few people you can rely on to help you on your journey, but that's not to say you have no responsibility, because the child is still yours. The child is still yours. Your network is to come alongside you and help, but the responsibility of raising the child is still on the parent. Which leads to point number 4. Take responsibility for your life today. Take responsibility for your life today. I don't know what the age range, my age range, I don't know if we're millennials or Gen Z. I don't know what the heck we are, but whatever we are the ones who love to play the blame game. We love to play the blame game. I didn't make the basketball team because the coach didn't like me. No, maybe you just weren't good at basketball. I didn't get the job because my employer was racist. No, maybe you just weren't qualified. You see, everything is always someone else's fault, but we need to take responsibility for the life we have. And we'll get more into this later, but everything is not always someone else's fault. Sometimes the fault lies squarely on our shoulders, and we need to accept that. Here's the craziest part, though. The more we accept responsibility for our life, the freer we get. The freer we get. And so your next blank, when we accept that we made some bad decisions, we can then heal from them and the outlook of our lives begin to change. Okay, we made some bad decisions. Accept it, heal from it, and move forward. Your whole outlook of life will change, which leads to the next one, point number 5. Forgive everybody, even when you don't forget. Forgive even when you do not forget. There is no need for us to play the blame game. When we take responsibility for the role we played in the situation, we can forgive that person for the role they played and move on with our life. But when we refuse to forgive someone, it turns from unforgiveness to bitterness. And Hebrews 12:14-15 tells us to watch out for this, because it says, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. The problem with bitterness is that whatever they did to you, they did it and they probably forgot about it. But you're still holding on to it. And you're allowing them to continue to hurt you after they've gone on with their life. Whatever happened may be something that will take time to forget, or maybe you'll never forget it. But that doesn't mean you can't forgive them. Remembering what someone did is one thing, but not forgiving them over what they did is what allows them to keep that power over you. And so your next blank is, forgiveness is never for the person who committed the offense. It is for the one who has been offended. Forgiveness isn't for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. It's so you can be free from their hold, because if you don't free yourself, bitterness rises up, and like we've spoke about before, bitterness is a silent killer. It's a silent killer. Bitterness begins to affect other things in our bodies and can be the cause of other illnesses, whatever they did. Regardless of how bad it was, it is, forgive them. Not for them, but for you. And when this happens, now you can begin to work your way out of the hole, and you can see life in a different light, because remember, you can't be the best parent for your child. when you're struggling yourself. Point number 6, set up consistent routines. Set up consistent routines. Routines become important because we won't always feel like doing something. We won't always feel like doing, for example, working out. Everyone is not motivated every time they get up to go work out. There are days that people don't feel like getting up and going to work out, and on those days, that is where routine kicks in. So your next blank is discipline and perseverance will always outperform perfection. Discipline and perseverance will always outperform perfection. A lot of people want to have one perfect workout a week. Just one perfect workout. But let's say instead they have 6 consistent average workouts in that week. Those results will be better than if they just had one perfect workout. So when life happens, sometimes it's our routine that gets us through. Stress is more manageable when our brain and our muscles have things that we know we need to achieve. Sometimes when motivation isn't there, our routine can actually move us forward. And then lastly, point number 7, be consistent and dependable by creating realistic standards of discipline that you are able to stick to all the time. In other words, keep it real. Keep it real with yourself. Set small goals that you can achieve every day, and that will lead to accomplishing bigger goals and bigger goals. People would actually be surprised how much impact making their bed up in the first thing in the morning does for you. We're results-based people. And so first thing in the morning, we've already achieved something by simply making up our bed. That sets the tone for the day. That's a small accomplishment, though. That's just a small accomplishment. But start with that and then allow achieving those to lead to larger accomplishments. What happens is, as a people, we like to skip over the small beginnings. Don't despise small beginnings. Don't despise small beginnings. Don't be ashamed of starting small. Anyone who has ever accomplished anything will tell you they started small. God has given us all something that we can access by faith that will enable us to improve upon our weaknesses until they are productive, until we are prosperous, and until He gets the praise. But we got to start somewhere. Got to start somewhere. And here's the cool thing about every single individual in this room right now. Your next blank. It honestly doesn't matter if you're a husband, wife, widow, single parent, blended family, or child. What it all comes down to is trusting God. That's what it all comes down to. It does not matter who you are. It comes down to trusting God in all of our lives. That is what it boils down to. Trusting God in whatever position of life you're in. This isn't on the PowerPoint, but it should be on your handout. Irrespective of what state you're in life, a successful Christian is one who can move from frustration to failure without losing faith. Frustration to failure without losing faith. Things are going to happen in life. Things are going to happen in life. Situations will occur that are out of our control. And let's just say things go from bad to worse. Things go from frustration to failure. Okay, but there's nowhere that says we have to lose our faith. We do not have to lose our faith. The level at which we can keep our faith in Jesus Christ is correlated to the level of success we will have. The level at which we keep the Word of God at the forefront of our mind in spite of the storm is the level at which we will have success. Joshua chapter 1, verse 8, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. So we have the prescription for our way to be prosperous. We are told the way that we will have good success, but what it comes down to is whether or not we will listen to the doctor. That's what it comes down to. Your next blank, life is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. Not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. Every situation, if it's looked at in the right way, becomes an opportunity. It becomes an opportunity for us to grow, to learn, to improve, or to slow down, but we have to be so in tune with God that we can hear what he's trying to communicate to us. Have you ever noticed the way that Hebrews 12, verse 1, chapter 12, verse 1 is worded? It says, "And let us run with patience the race that is set before us." And so when we think about running a race, we definitely don't think about patience. We think about full speed. When an Olympic athlete, Usain Bolt, is about to run the 400-meter race, they aren't thinking about running their race with patience. They're thinking about going faster than their opponent. But for the past 4 years leading up to race day, they have been patiently preparing for that day. On the first day of training, I guarantee they didn't go out and run a 400-meter. Matter of fact, they probably didn't even run. Yet they were still preparing for their race. And so it takes patience to run our race, and the patience is found in the preparation for our race. Our success is going to come at the intersection of preparation and perspiration, which is sweat. In other words, success is going to come when we are prepared and when we work hard. We have to run our race with patience by being prepared to run effectively. And how do we do that? Good question. Hebrews 12:1. He says, "Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us." Lay aside every weight. Take care of your responsibilities, but all the extra stuff that is weighing you down, get rid of it. Nobody runs with a weighted vest. Nobody runs with weighted ankle weights around their ankles. How much sense would that make? But see, that's how we go through life. We go through life trying to run our race while wearing a weighted vest and strapping on some ankle weights, and then we wonder why we're dragging. We wonder why we're moving so slow. We wonder why life just seems to pass us by, because it is. It is. Lay aside every weight. Lay aside every weight. Get rid of the sin in our lives so that we can run our race effectively. We have to learn how to take the power that we have in Christ and use it for whatever it is we need in life. The Spirit and the power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead now dwells in us, but we have to access it. And we access it by staying connected to the source. Single parents and blended families are not God's ideal, but His grace is sufficient to overcome any and every obstacle as we surrender and trust Him day by day. Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 17, "Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heavens and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee." We got to believe that, though. We got to believe that. So just recapping before we move on. Number one, make your relationship with Christ your number one priority. Number two, get connected with a strong, godly, same-sex group for support and accountability. Number three, accept this season of your life and set realistic expectations. Number four, remember, God can make up for what you can't give your kids. Number five, refuse to become a victim. Don't become a martyr. Don't try to become a super parent. Do the best you can. Number six, don't compromise your spiritual and moral standards to provide a father or a mother for your children. Number seven, prepare your testimony of God's faithfulness and grace in your life. And so now I want to turn our focus to the actual kids and what our responsibility is towards them. A lot of the times our thinking is that, okay, we want to reach the adults with the gospel, and then we want to help them mature in their faith in Christ. And so we accept the kids as a throw-in. They're just a throw-in. I mean, aren't the adults the ones who call the shots in the world and determine the nature of our current and future reality? In our discipleship class, a phrase that they have heard more than once is strong families make strong churches, and strong churches make strong families. So if the family is central to the health of a strong church, shouldn't we invest our resources and energy into the adults who lead those families? When it comes to understanding the simplicities of the Christian faith, don't adults have the greatest learning capacities? The answer to all these questions is no. You see, we've lost the vision for how important the youth are in this world and in the church. We look at kids as just being included in the package deal when we couldn't be more wrong. What's going on here with some of the adults growing is cool. No doubt, that's cool, but we have missed the mark when it comes to our children. We've missed the mark. And so it's important for us to know and understand God's expectation when it comes to nurturing our children. The local church does play a role in this, but the family plays the most crucial role. So your next blank, there should be a healthy partnership between the church and the parents in raising God-loving and God-fearing children. Hold on to that because we'll come back to it. But there should be a healthy partnership between the church and the parents in raising God-loving and God-fearing children. Our children are the ones who define the future, which makes them our legacy. God never told us to take over the world by force or intelligence. He told us to have children and raise them to honor God in all that they do. That's it. So bearing and raising children is one of our greatest responsibilities. It's said that the greatest time to impact a child is between the ages of 5 and 12 years old. And so if you want to shape a person's life, whether you're most concerned about their moral, spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, or economic development and thinking, it's during that time, between the ages of 5 and 12. In these 8 years of that child's existence, lifelong habits, values, beliefs, and attitudes are instilled and formed within them that they'll never forget. You see, everyone has challenges and difficulties on their way to adulthood, but what they learn as children informs the way that they will respond to adversity. The government is pumping millions upon millions upon millions into the public school system, but there's also an evil agenda that is being pushed behind that. Intellectually, our kids have all the resources. But when it comes to the storms of life, intellectualism will not get the job done. Adolescence is a season of life, or the youth stage is a season of life characterized by ups and downs, hopes and despair, victories and defeats. So a child's life is constantly changing. Most of America's kids are spending a lot of time in the classroom, and in 2022, I'm not sure that that's a great thing. And I definitely don't want to minimize the importance of school. Do not hear that. That's not what I'm saying. I think during the pandemic, it opened all of our eyes to how important school and teachers really are. But we need to understand that school in 2022 doesn't have the same meaning as it did in 1980. Here are some quick sobering stats of the world our children are growing up in. 1 out of every 10 teenagers has sexual intercourse before his or her 13th birthday, and that number is continually rising. This means that they are at greater risk of acquiring a permanent and incurable sexually transmitted disease. 1 out of every 10 8th graders smoke daily. 1 out of every 5 use drugs of some type, ranging from marijuana to hallucinogens to ecstasy. 1 out of 3 have been drunk, and many have admitted to regular alcohol use and binge drinking, and we're talking about 8th graders. These are 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds. Gangs exist in 3 out of every 10 public schools. 1 out of every 14 students is threatened and or injured at school with a weapon. 1 out of every 7 is involved in a serious fight on school grounds. There is no doubt that something is happening to the future of this world. Our generation is in trouble. The youth generation is in trouble. I won't even get into the attack that social media is having on our youth, because it's causing some to commit suicide. Kids are spending hours upon hours upon hours on something that is a lie, which is social media. So how can they ever know the truth? So we shouldn't be surprised that mental disorders and ADHD and all the other ones are on the rise right along with everything else. That shouldn't be a shock to us. But do know that the most of the emotional stability and maturity of children stems from their relationship with their family. Most of the emotional stability and maturity of children stems from their relationship with their family. The effects of what we talked about earlier, divorce, cohabitation, and births to unmarried parents are taking a toll on our children. 1 out of every 3 children are born to an unmarried spouse. 1 out of every 4 presently lives with a single parent. And if we think this is not having an impact on our children, we couldn't be more wrong. This combination of factors has led some parents to admit that they are not spending meaningful time with their children simply because they don't have the time to do so, which in turn causes that child to seek and receive attention elsewhere. Maybe the child hasn't been physically abandoned by their parent, but millions are traumatized by receiving their parents' emotional leftovers. Everything and everybody has the parents' time except the kids. You see, the world is becoming more and more complex. But children maintain the same basic needs they have always had: to be trusted, to be loved, to feel safe, and to find purpose in this life. The gifts of childhood innocency and joy and trust are rapidly becoming extinct because they're growing up way too fast. Many of the choices and outcomes in children's lives relate to 2 things: morality and spirituality. And I can hear parents now. I can hear it now. I want my boys say it. I want to give my child a better life than I had. I want to give her the things that I never had. All right, cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But we've forgotten to give them the morals and standards that we did have. You want to give them the stuff that you didn't have, but you are forgetting to give them the stuff to give them the stuff that you did have. Well-intentioned parents are now trying to buy experiences and environments that will produce soft and satisfying lifestyles for their children. They want their children to avoid difficulties while forgetting that it was the difficulties of life that made us who we are today. The existence of difficulties, failures, or persecutions built our character and resolve. It gave us a reason and a need to trust God. You see, parents have removed that aspect from children's lives, and in turn, they have become God to them. So why would kids need God when mommy or daddy gives them whatever they want? If they want something, they get it. If they want to do something, they do it. They don't want to do something, they don't do it. See, parents have lost any and all authority over their children in the name of trying to give them a better life than I had. Since life is primarily about a spiritual battle we're thrust in, our children need to learn and be equipped to fight. The spiritual foundation in their lives needs to be set, and it needs to be set early. Your next blank: the most significant aspect of anyone's life is his or her spiritual health. In a world where they'll tell you physical, mental, emotional, relational, professional, intellectual, or socioeconomic health is most important, we have to be persuaded within ourselves first, and then instill in our kids that spiritual health is the most important thing we can have. If our spiritual health is off, every other health is going to be off as well. Every dimension of a person's existence hinges on his or her spiritual condition. For example, many people in the world without money experience greater levels of joy and fulfillment in life than those with money because their view of life is based on the depth of their relationship with Christ. So instead of defining success by how much stuff they have, those who may not have as much as others realize a greater degree of peace and joy because they view life as nothing more than a prelude to a more glorious existence with God in heaven. The lack of physical resources is deemed secondary to the security they have in Christ's love. So those who have everything or live a life trying to get material things do not see God's hand at work in their lives, which will lead to an unsatisfying life. Despite how much stuff you have, you won't be satisfied. The difference between these two groups is the position that God and their faith holds in their life. The difference is their spiritual foundation. Yeah, we can strive to give our children all the advantages the world has to offer. We can motivate them to make the most of available resources and opportunities, but unless their spiritual life is prioritized and nurtured, they will miss out on the purpose, meaning, and joy of life, and the effects of that will be disastrous. Whether we want to admit it or not, whether we want to believe it or not, your next blank, every choice we make is ultimately a spiritual decision. Every choice we make is ultimately a spiritual decision. No matter the issue, no matter the challenge, our decision comes down to what we believe is right or wrong. And what we believe is right or wrong is based squarely on our sense of truth and purpose. Our perspective on every matter comes from our spiritual beliefs. As children grow up, they are faced every day with numerous questions and choices regarding how to live. And so what they'll do is they'll take cues from their environment, particularly people they trust, as to how they're going to respond to the choices that they make every day. And so unless children are shown the spiritual implications of their decisions, it will result in unforeseen and unfortunate consequences. And I get it. You probably think it's a stretch to say every decision we make is spiritual at its foundation. I get it. How can something as regular and routine as an entree that's bought at a restaurant affect their spiritual lives? Okay, well, the food that's ordered affects the health of their physical health of their bodies, which in turn affects their ability to fulfill God's calling and purposes for their life. On top of that, the entree isn't free. It costs money. The expense of the meal will affect the amount of money they have to apply towards the priorities they have established in their lives. It's no secret it's cheaper to eat at home than at a restaurant. So even that choice is a reflection of their sense of responsibility towards God and how we are stewarding the money He has given us. Am I saying never eat out? No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is children should be taught to be good stewards of whatever has been given to them by God, and that can be reflected in many areas. I just brought up the example or used the example of a restaurant. You see, the Bible tells us that one day we will have to give an account to God for every choice we made. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 9. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart. In other words, do what you want to do. Live it up. Live your best life in a sarcastic tone. That's what Solomon is talking about. Live it up. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. Let thy heart cheer thee. Do whatever your heart desires. Walk in the ways of thine heart. Do what you want to do. Whatever you see, take it. But know this, that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment, buddy. He'll bring you into judgment. Romans 14:12. So then, every one of us shall give account of himself to God. We will give an account as to how we utilized every resource God entrusted us with: money, relationships, ideas, time, possessions, and words. And I can hear you now. All right, Dallas, it sounds like you're over-spiritualizing life. You're taking it a little too far with this, okay? But just think about it. If you believe that life is about knowing, loving, and serving God, then every decision, no matter how small, will run through that spiritual filter. But if you believe life is about loving and serving yourself, every decision you make is going to be made based off of your own selfish ambitions. Jesus was deliberate in every choice he made because he was focused on serving his Father and glorifying his name. Everything he did was for a reason, and that reason was always related back, or always came back to his relationship with God. He came to this earth and did what he was supposed to do and went back home to heaven, and that ought to be our mentality. We're on this earth to do what we need to do and then head home to heaven. This world is not our home, and so we shouldn't be consumed with finding satisfaction in it. Our kids need to learn and see that in us first, but unfortunately they aren't. They see us trying to live our best life on this earth, and that best life, more times than not, has nothing to do with God. We aren't considering the spiritual implications of our choices, so why would our children? Part of our responsibility as parents is to expose our children to the ways and expectations of God. And during those formative years between 5 and 12, children are going to develop their decision-making patterns and process, but it comes from the guidance of the parents. So no, it's not a stretch for me to say every single decision we make is based off of our spiritual foundation. In everything, parents need to be teaching their children. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 5 and 7, it says, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart." Verse 7, "And thou shalt teach them diligently until thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." In other words, all the time. There will always be opportunities to teach. In order for our children to grow into healthy and whole adults, we have to help them build strong foundations to prepare them for the rest of their lives. And again, this responsibility must first come from the home, not the church. The first thing a lot of parents ask, the first thing a lot of parents inquire about when looking for a new church is, what is the youth program like? What's the youth program like? And I get it, that's a fair question. But we need to get something straight. The church is not supposed to raise your children. The church is not supposed to raise your children. You are. The church comes alongside you as you are raising your child. That's why I said earlier, it is a partnership. Kids grow up in the church and they turn out to be little hell raisers. Then the church gets blamed when in all actuality, it's the parents' fault that the child turned out the way they did. Okay, let's just say you're solely relying on the church to do all the spiritual foundational teachings in your child's life, and you never do anything at home. You're relying on the church. Let's break this down so we can all see how when people do that, it'll never work. Kids are at school for 7 or 8 hours a day. Let's say 7. 7 hours times 5 days, 35 hours a week that they are at school being influenced by pretty much everything against the Bible. Then you bring them to church, and we may have 45 minutes to an hour with them. So in 1 week, if you do nothing to set their spiritual foundation with them at home outside of the church, the ratio, 35 hours of worldliness to 1 hour of godliness. Let's say you have a good month and you bring them to church every Sunday, but still you're never doing anything with them at home. Okay, 35 hours a week times 4 weeks in a month, that's 140 hours in a month of school. You got 4 Sundays in 1 month, that's 4 hours in 1 month of spiritual guidance. That's 140 hours of worldliness compared to 4 hours of godliness in 1 month. if you're only relying on the church, if the only time your child is hearing about God is when they come through these doors, even if they come every Sunday, you as their parent are setting them up for complete and utter failure. This is why we are in the state we're in as a church and as a people. The church has a responsibility, and I readily admit we can be doing a better job, and we will do a better job. But we are to come alongside the parents and partner with them, not do their job for them. We can't force y'all to come here. We can't force anybody to come here. We can't force anybody to bring their children here. We can't monitor what you guys are doing at home. That's on you. That's on you. So I don't know if we have time to open it up for any discussion. I know people are pulling up, so I don't know what you want to move into, but that's relationship workshop number 5, parents and children. Are there any questions?